In Alice Springs tonight, a curfew is in place for all children and young people under 18. The curfew was ordered by the Northern Territory government for 2 weeks in response to violence that took place in the town on Tuesday. Dozens of people swarmed the Todd Tavern, kicking down glass doors and throwing objects at the building. The immediate cause was a family dispute following the funeral of a young man who died earlier this month. But for everyone looking for solutions to intractable problems in Alice Springs, the causes are deep. Catherine Liddle is the Chief Executive of the National Peak Body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children. Catherine Liddle, welcome to 7:30.
Hello.
Now, you've just been in a meeting with the Northern Territory Chief Minister as the curfew goes into its second night. Do you think that she understands the violence and its causes in Alice Springs?
Look, I think when we talked to her, we were talking about the need for child safety, and certainly the Chief Minister talked about, well, how do we keep children safe, and that it absolutely has to be a priority. And we were asking her about things like, well, who is actually going to enforce the curfew, and you know, are the children going to come into contact with people like police who might inflame a situation? And it was good to hear that she said she'd been listening to community, and community had said that won't necessarily work. We might need extra police around us, but it will be youth workers that come into contact with children. When we said, well, what will it mean for children who have to go to the cinema? What will it mean for children who might be working? And again, what we were told is the curfew doesn't apply to children in those circumstances. And then the other question we were asking her, particularly around the safety about the children, was, well, then who makes the determination of what safety looks like, and what supports will be brought in to make sure if a family is experiencing vulnerability that that is responded to, and that we aren't unnecessarily punishing people who are in great distress. What was blatantly obvious in that conversation was that they had listened to many people, and the common theme was, we are a community in distress, we are a community that needs some healing, we are a community that really needs the next 2 weeks to think about how we move past short-term solutions into long-term solutions.
Let me just go back a step with you, if I could, Catherine. What was your response to those scenes in Alice Springs on Tuesday? How did you respond?
Oh, they were distressing. There's no other way to describe that. And certainly, you know, I was interstate at the time, and I had family members on the phone going, "Look at this." People were upset. People were upset for a number of reasons, and everyone understands that we've had a collision of events that all have different underlying drivers. But people were flabbergasted, people were distressed, and the need for action is now, the need for a circuit breaker is now, and the need to genuinely be looking at what the underlying drivers are has to be addressed, and the need to respond to people's distress also has to be right up there.
And just before we talk about those solutions, just part of that day, the police have described a violent confrontation that continued after the attack on the Todd Tavern in one of the town camps in Alice Springs. I think they described 150 people, some of them with weapons, tomahawks, axes, knives and clubs, a terrifying description. Now, some of the people arrested, presumably the ringleaders, were not children, they were much older people. So is a curfew targeted only at young people the right response to that terrible, to the events of that day?
Yeah. So when we were talking to the Chief Minister, they said that there actually is the ability to apply that curfew to adults where it is appropriate. So it won't just target children, and certainly we're always saying children aren't the only cause of antisocial behaviour in Alice Springs. So it does have that level of flexibility. I think also what you've heard, if you've seen the media coming out of Alice Springs, which I'm sure you have, is our land councils and our local leaders saying this is one where we have to be listening to the traditional owners, and you know, I belong to that group of traditional owners, to say we need a greater level of respect and empowerment to our traditional mob, to say this is not the behaviour we expect in Alice Springs. This is how we might be able to stop that behaviour. But the other one is, you know, when we were talking to the Chief Minister, she said, you know, in the next couple of weeks, we are going to see those community consultations that bring in anyone that has skin in the game to talk about what might be happening and how we might be able to respond. And certainly when we hear that, we say, well, what make sure the community voice is in there, those people who are experiencing what's going on, and that means everyone in the community, so that you can genuinely respond to something very quickly that potentially could be snuffed out before it became a problem. Sometimes the solutions aren't as difficult as they seem. Certainly getting rid of entrenched disadvantaged will be a big piece of work, but there are certainly some easy tweaks, and that's like, where are the safe places for children? You know, where do they go after dark if they want to play, or if they're not feeling comfortable in their homes? Where do they go?
Well, let me ask you a question about that, particularly in relation to the curfew. I mean, I presume a number of these children don't have a safe home to go to. So how do you deal with that? Because a hostel isn't necessarily a safe environment either. What about those children whose homes are unsafe?
So what we were told when we were talking to the Chief Minister, because again we were leaning in on that, so where do they go where to be safe, and who determines what safety will look like in those environments? What was encouraging in that conversation is that the Chief Minister said that they will be working with local youth workers and local community groups to help identify where a safe place is. So if maybe it isn't in that home, maybe it's in someone else's home. If it's somewhere else that they need to bed, then those areas of safety will be identified. And more importantly, how do you then respond to it? There's no point in coming up with a short-term solution. That's when those other support services have to kick in and go and work with families. What is going wrong in your home? Bring those things in and get rid of the problem.
Now, but are there enough workers on hand? I mean, in some of these situations where a child says they don't want to go home because they don't feel safe, I understand that the Children's Agency in the Northern Territory, Territory Families, is short of staff at the moment. So in a crisis moment like this, do you have enough people to look after some very vulnerable children?
The truth is, in regional and remote areas across Australia, there is a massive problem in retaining staff in their care economy. Now that's experienced in all care economies, but in regional and remote areas, very, very difficult. Now Alice Springs isn't the only jurisdiction having trouble at this point in time. All those other states and territories will tell you the same thing. This isn't necessarily a crime problem, this is a social problem. This is the ability to bring in the workforce, and the workforce genuinely isn't there. So in the short term, they are bringing in additional police, as we know. That's only one part of this, and certainly we're always going to say police aren't the solution to children. So there does need to be some work on growing the workforce, but there also needs to be a piece of work that says, if we don't have this in place right now, what else can we bring in? And certainly Aboriginal communities in particular will say, well, don't forget about us. We actually have capacity as families. Are you talking to us about families and how we can step in at times of crisis like this? So there does need to be another piece that sits around it and says, at this point in time, until we can build that workforce, how do we get there? And there also needs to be another piece of work that says, look, stop smashing Alice Springs and making it look like this is somewhere where no one would want to live. Yes, we are having some issues, but everywhere has some issues. You know, we've got to stop smashing this environment.
I mean, that said, however, obviously these were unusually violent scenes. They were distressing for everybody involved. But just briefly, let me ask you this. After the last outbreak of violence that shocked the nation, really, last year in Alice Springs, I take your point about not wanting to always be pointing the finger at Alice Springs. However, $250 million was pledged by the federal government as an emergency response to that problem. Has that money made a difference?
Look, when the Alice Springs plan was released, we were very quick off the mark to say, make sure in how you respond to the action plan that you are bringing in community voices, and we're going to continue to say that. If you want those dollars to hit the ground in the way that they need to be hitting the ground, if you want solutions to work, then they have to be owned by the community. You know, we have to be bringing those voices forward and find out what is actually happening, because it is amazing what happens when you put people who are experiencing vulnerability, or people who have been victims of crime even, in the room to talk about what is going on, because often there's a fast fix. What we'd like is for all of those dollars to line up. What we'd like is all of those policies to line up. And what we'd like is an opportunity for our community to heal and get past this extraordinary distress.
Catherine Liddle, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.